Hello, good evening or good morning once again to my GE2 and 20 students. How are you? I hope life is treating you well today. I'm recording this at past 12 midnight because our neighborhood has a lot of dogs in the morning, so I can't record that well in the morning because of the noise of some dogs that we have. So today, as you notice, we are in the terrace, enjoying the coolness of the evening. I intentionally wore this because to avoid the glare of the light reflecting on my forehead. Anyway, and I had given the instructions for the second exam on your LMS. So I hope you take note of that. So what I really expect is for you to choose works of famous artists like Dali, Da Vinci, or anything else. I hope you won't have duplication of choices. So probably I can just put what you call this forum probably. So you can just uh, write a post the title of your work so that there will be no duplication against your classmates. So I'll do that after this lecture. Then, so to help us in to have a better understanding of the lessons or the interpretation of the works, so I decided to include this design. Okay, so we had discussed just a short review the elements of art. So we discussed here line, color, form, shape, space, texture, and value. So these are the meanings of different lines: vertical lines, horizontal, diagonal, curved. So they represent action, freedom, etc. So as discussed in the previous lessons. Then here are examples of vertical lines shown in the works of artists or architects. Horizontal lines, diagonal lines, how they work, translated into architecture. Curved lines, the famous Sydney Opera House is one good example. In terms of the use of color, you notice that kind of community, very picturesque. Russia as well has temples that are very colorful. They look like candies from afar, giant candies. Okay, so we also have, I have a competition with my background. Anyway, it won't last. Okay, so with the warm colors and the cool colors, remember that warm colors, reds, oranges, yellows. Cool colors are the blues, purples, and greens. So you notice here how color affects humans in terms of how they feel and they act. We have the form and shape. When you say form, it composes of three-dimensional shapes. Then when you talk about shape, it's only limited to 2 dimensions. There is translated into architecture. Then we have space. How do you use space? Incorporate space in your design. You can enlarge visual spaces. So we have open and cluttered spaces, cramped or used versus unused spaces. Like how do you design tables in a restaurant to maximize the space? Okay, texture talks about the surface look or feel of something, rough surface with smooth surface. There, the rough texture. value talks about the relative lightness or darkness of the color from the dark blue to the light color. Then we have methods, shade, degree, darkness of a color when we add black to it, tint when we add white to a particular hue, and tone for gray. Okay, value. Okay, in terms of color as well. Okay, now our main lesson for today is about visual design principles. So these 7 principles encompass an interesting design. So we'll be talking about balance, rhythm, emphasis, proportion and scale, movement, contrast, and of course, unity. So when we talk about balance, parts of the design are equally distributed to create a sense of stability. Both physical and visual balance exist. So we have these different types of balance. We have symmetrical or formal balance, which we will be discussing individually. Okay, let's begin with symmetrical balance or formal balance, another term for that. So the elements within the design are identical in relation to a center line or axis. So you look at this. The example is the Taj Mahal in India. So see the balance in the left and the right are identical, so we call it symmetrical. It's like the design in a leaf is symmetrical. Then we have asymmetrical or informal balance, where the parts of the design are not identical but are equal in visual weight. So look at the example here. So the design is not asymmetrical, but they're still of equal in visual weight. Then we have balance, radial balance. Radial refers to something that is circle. Then vertical balance, from top to bottom are equal parts. So here the vertical balance there is the reflection of the building in the water. So whatever you see on the building is exactly identical with what's down there as a reflection of the water. Then horizontal balance, the parts on the left and the right sides are equal, like this Buddhist temple in Hong Kong and the building facade, Limburg, Germany. So another example here. So you look at the floor plan of the building, where you can really appreciate the balance. Probably from the inside you won't notice, but looking at the floor plan you would appreciate how it's done and how it's designed by the architect. Okay, when you talk about rhythm, it refers to the repeated use of line, shape, color, texture, or pattern. So we have different types: regular, graduated, random, and gradated. Let's check all of them. The regular rhythm is an element that is repeated at the same time, repetition or interval each time, like the designs in our towels, in our floors, in our carpets or tiles. So they maintain rhythm. So a regular rhythm is an element that is repeated at the same time or repetition interval in each time. So you can see the pattern in these houses at Rotterdam, Netherlands. So when you random rhythm, the beats of the element are random or are at regular intervals. So as you notice here, what we have, I'm showing you are samples from architecture, but you can also see that in paintings or even in music. So these principles apply, or in sculpture. Gradated rhythm are the repeated element is identical with the exception of one detail, increasing or decreasing gradually with each repetition. So you notice there from the lowest to the highest, or vice versa. So like this one, the stone from the biggest to the smallest in a gradated rhythm. This is fun. Try doing that in a river. When you are in a river, try to look for rocks and put them on top of each other, just maintaining the balance. You'll be surprised. Okay, then we have, so it's also evident in roofs, especially with the Japanese or the Chinese styles of temples. You can see that kind of rhythm. Okay, let me pause for a while. The next one is emphasis. Okay, the feature in a design that attracts one's eye, or the focal point. So emphasis can be achieved through size. For example, among smaller circles, you put in a big circle in the middle, so the big circle will get the emphasis. Or vice versa, you can have big circles, then you have a small circle in the middle. So like the picture here, the ceiling mosaic in Park Ruel. So it really captures the attention of visitors because it has the emphasis. So you can also use it using placement or shape or a particular color and the use of lines. So what else? Look at that. Where do you think is the emphasis here? So the emphasis is clearly shown in the, what they call this, temple. So it seems like all roads lead to that particular building to create an emphasis. Moving on, we talk about proportion and scale. So you have comparative relationships between elements in the design with respect to size. So 3:5 ratio is known as the golden mean. Okay, so everything in nature you can see ratio and proportion working. Like the proportion of your elbow is compared to the whole arm, proportion of your knee in comparison to the whole leg. So that's proportion. Sometimes we see paintings like the neck is a bit longer compared to the real thing. So it's because the artist intended it to be that way. We call it elongation. So you feel like the arms are a bit longer compared to the natural as what they are. But you have to realize that sometimes artists do that intentionally to create the elongation method. Okay, now for movement, even with static items in art, we can still show a flow or a feeling of action. Like especially with curves and diagonal lines. And contrast could could make something noticeably different. So that can be created with using color, with proportion and scale, with the shape, texture, etc. Even with the designs and the color choices in motorcycles, for example, if you have an all black motorcycle and with a very small or thin lines of yellow or neon green, it creates a particular contrast with that color. So, and somehow indirectly that creates emphasis on those colors as well. Now, when we talk about unity, it is achieved by the consistent use of lines, color, material, and or texture within a design. Even though individually some things that could really not stand out if they are alone, but if you put them together, they can create a unity. So this also works with music. These same principles also work with music and other forms of arts. So sometimes you hear sounds that are in themselves are not good sounding, but they are put in a particular orchestra or in a choir, for example. They blend in together, they harmonize, and they produce unity or to represent the whole material. So here, the unity of items in architecture, different types of shapes employed in the design. Okay, so so much for that. Now let's move on with wait. For a while. Okay, going back to where we left off in our lessons. So I just want to go through some important items here. So to finish off chapter 2, so talk about space and perspective is what they have discussed. That here, all the same, there is truth to reality presented by photography. It is the truth based on what Gombrich calls the eyewitness principle. So when you say eyewitness principles, it depends on you as a person and how you perceive the things around you. As what is explained here is like a lighthouse. A lighthouse, what do you call this? Releases the light around him, but this time, as a person, you are the one taking in the light instead of releasing it. So just like that, you as a person becomes the center of the visual of everything surrounding you. And perspective in visual images means that the arrangement and relative sizes of objects is true to the eyewitness principle, so that the whole image is dependent upon the point of view of the potential beholders. It depends on your point of view, and that's your perspective. So what else? Here you can see here the perspective. So you see the lines converging and the horizon vanishing, because that's how it is in nature. We call it a linear perspective. So it is a powerful reality effect because it mimics the way in which we seem to see in a normal vision. So we have to see beyond linearity. So we should avoid the temptation to collapse all forms of linear perspective under the single logic. However, just because something looks as though it is obeying similar rules of internal order doesn't mean that it is attempting to do the same sorts of things. So other cultures may use elements of linear perspective, but with a different set of imperatives. Then he provided an example using the Japanese ukiyo-e. Remember that picture of a guy with very small eyes turning around. So these are very complicated examples here, but something you can relate is the example of the games, not only with the Age of Emperors, but today I think the more famous games that you can relate to are Aran online. What else? Dota, where they use maps and make you control your character, or sometimes even in the first person perspective. So gives you idea of how the whole area looks like and where you are at that location. Okay, so we have new technologies of seeing here that was discussed. So among that, wait, here. So going back to our guides, the new technology of seeing, we have technology is defined variously. Of course, we understand it to be a range of objects like tools and other instruments or devices. And we understand it as a sort of knowledge, know-how, and skill. But sometimes we think that this technology begins with us, but going back, you will be surprised to know that during the Renaissance time or even before that, artists are already employing those kinds of tools. Not of course in an advanced way, but the principle behind it is still the same. So technology can also be understood as an organizing principle and a process. Okay, so the way in which the society constitutes itself and its formations, and then brings people and machines together to produce goods and services. So that's the purpose of technology, to produce a particular good or service in a way that it makes it easier for everybody. So the current era in making and is marked by an incredible range of visual technologies using all the senses of the term presented above. It includes older forms of films, video, television, the newer ones of computers, internet, and virtual reality, and the scientific mechanisms of microscope, telescope, and digital imaging, especially photograph. They say photography is not really related to the real experience that we have, because in photography you are capturing a particular truth at that instant. But in reality, our eyes are in constant motion, so it always looks at a lot of things, and it doesn't just stare at the thing for a moment. Even if you stare, the thing around you, or the thing that you're staring at, will always be in a constant motion. So moving on. So what we can take from this is that technology is not just know-how or a group of design devices. It's also a verb, a principle of action. It's constantly moving, it's constantly evolving into something better. Okay, so I hope this sheds light on you on how you would look at a particular work of art. So apply the elements, parts, and the principles behind it in your interpretation of those works of art. Okay, so see you on our next video. This will be the last. This will be the last lecture we have on lesson 2. So on the first exam. So the next lessons we will be discussing on will be for the second exam discussions. Okay, so good morning, and please give me time to check on your work. I still have a lot of backlogs to work on. I hope you bear with me. So I'm excited to, I'm having fun actually reading all your comments, your reactions on particular activities that we have. But what I want you to do is to really focus on reading this material in advance. It's quite complicated in some sense. Even I have a hard time, I have a lot of difficulty understanding it. This is also something new to me, so I'm studying like you are, but at least it sheds light on a lot of things and improving our visual literacy. Okay, so see you again next time. Goodbye.